You might think before you can do latte flips that you're going to want to know how to do a regular heel flip. Personally, I don't think you do. I learned latte flips first. Now, if you already know heel flips, cool. If you're struggling with latte flips, maybe work on that. I don't think it's entirely necessary, but your mileage may vary. Your setup for a latte flip is like you're doing a Cooper flip or a butter flip. You want your front foot to be on the back wheels while you're in heelside rail, and the back foot should be positioned where it would be for a rail flip, just on that curve of the tail right there. Now that said, I'm a regular footed skater, and I just happen to do all of my rail flips at this end of the board. That foot is my popping foot, that's what I like to do. But you will get some regular footed skaters who, they want to do their rail flips at this end anyway. You know, a regular rail flip, and they'll pop from there. If that's the case for you, just stand at the front end of the board to do the latte flip. It doesn't matter which end you do it on. Now, if you've come into this from street skating, where you've got a background in ollie tricks, you might be tempted to call that a nollie latte flip. Don't do that, because it's not a nollie. A nollie is a rolling trick. This is just a latte flip. Rail flips aren't stanced. It doesn't matter which end of the board you do them off. Just choose whichever you find most comfortable and call it a latte flip. Doesn't need to be more complicated than that. As a general rule, I don't like these kneeling and explaining the motion sort of things, but in this case it's very necessary, because even if I had the most fantastic slow-mo camera in the world, there's something you'd miss if you only ever saw me do the trick. What I've got to do to start a latte flip is push the board forwards, just to that point. I'm aiming to lift the nose of the board and just rock the board forward, because I want to get to the point where it's just destabilized enough that this front foot can come up and come through here and basically just knock that part of the board forwards, just like I'm doing a regular heel flip. Now, the reason I say you're not going to see this even in slow-mo is that there's a tendency to think that you're using your back foot and pushing that way really hard. You're not. All of the flip needs to come off the front foot doing that motion. If your back foot is pushing through and actually flipping the board, it's not a latte flip, and it's not going to feel as good. Inevitably, even though I've just told you exactly what to do, you're going to ignore me. Whether consciously or subconsciously, you're going to get on that board and you're going to go, right, Tony said I need to push it down slightly forward, but it's like an ollie trick, so I've really got to stomp it, so I've got to go, right, really hard, ah! And you're going to do that over and over and over again, every variation of that. This is going to be your first major battle, the first thing you need to understand and get right. Although it functions like an ollie heel flip, you're not really doing an ollie motion with the back foot. It's more like the start of a right-gus flip. Obviously, a right-gus flip was standing 45 degree, but you rock the board into that space. That's what starts a latte flip. We're stood side on, but it's the same thing. Just rock the board to there. Get used to that to begin with. Don't worry about flipping, just that. If you go too hard or too far, you'll fall. Once you get used to that, we can start thinking about the front foot. And that's where things actually get difficult. As you start to get a feel for that little motion of pushing forwards and finding that biting point, finding the sweet spot to jump from, you'll realize that it's actually a very narrow window there. It's a very, very fine motion that's needed and a very precise takeoff. And while you can do these with any board, given enough patience and practice and familiarity, the reason for that will be the shape of your deck. Most modern double kick freestyle boards have a very tapered tail. And that's because that shape, rail flips really easy. If all you want to do is just hammer it round, that's really simple. Street popsicles are even more unstable than that is. But if you have a single kick lying around, try taking that out instead. This is the Kill Your Idols from Moonshine, but most single kicks follow the same sort of path. They have a very, very rounded end, which we can ignore for this trick, and they have a very square end, and that's going to become your best friend. When you're stood on that and you start rocking it forwards, trying to find that bite point, you'll find it can go a lot further before it collapses on you. That is a much more stable and predictable takeoff. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to be using this. So having spent far too long talking about board shapes and starting positions and tiny motions with the back foot, it's finally time to start talking about where the flip comes from, the front foot. And as I alluded to at the start, if you've done normal heel flips, you might think you know what you're doing here, but I think it'll probably hinder rather than help you. Because while the core idea is the same, we're lifting the nose and we're sliding up and kicking outwards. And importantly, you need to make sure you are using your heel. I've seen a lot of people toe poke heel flips lately. Don't. Your heel has to come through here, bump, right behind the wheel. The fact you're doing this off the rail makes it just different enough. You're going to inevitably make the same two mistakes, I think. The first one is expecting the nose to come up as high as it would with a regular heel flip. That doesn't happen. If you aim for where a heel flip would be, you're probably going to do this. Over and over and over again. And why I exaggerated that? I have done that and variations of that far too many times over the years. The second problem you'll have is overcompensating for that issue. You'll think, well, okay, so it's not coming up as high as I expect, so if I go further down, that might make it flip. But then inevitably, every time you do that, something like this will happen. It will turn into some horrible forward flip, dolphin flip variation. I don't know what you want to call that trick. And, ow. While someone better and with more patience than me might be able to make that work, I really don't want to. That hurt enough as it was. The counter to that, the solution, is feeling. It's sensitivity, and not in the, happy, clappy, good times sort of way. You need to pay attention to your front foot. You need to think at all times, where is that foot? What am I doing with it? You can't switch off. You need to think, what am I feeling underneath the sole of that foot? And if you get it right, if you can feel that motion as it comes up through the rail, you should be able to flick out at just the right moment. That's what makes these so hard. It's not something you just hit and hope. You have to have that level of attention and sensitivity, and that takes some time. As much as it sounds like I'm taking the piss, talking about, really being sensitive with that front foot and like really connecting to the board, man. You've really got to feel it. But like, it is true. I'm not just taking the piss. If you leave the board, if you disconnect from it for a second, then things will get a little bit squirrely underneath you. And then when you do reconnect with the board, rather than just skim out and nudge it like that into a flip, because that's all it really is, just skim off and just pull it into the flip. What tends to happen is you hit it chock, and you'll know it, you'll feel it instantly. It tends to hit you more here when that happens, and you just get a oomph of heel into the grip. Best case scenario when that happens, it'll tumble off the floor and maybe land the right way up. Worst case scenario, you get an amazing heel bruise and the board just goes, oh, really loudly. You don't want that. It's just not fun. It batters your grip tape up. Like, just don't do it. So remember, really feel the board, really connect to it, be sensitive to its needs. Oh, God, I need to wash my mouth out. Ugh. One final note. If you're convinced that you have that magical connection to your skateboard and your front foot definitely can't be doing something wrong, yet you're still either flying off into space, completely missing it, or you're hitting it completely chock and just bouncing it off the floor, check your floor. I've noticed while filming these that if the floor is sloped, it makes it an absolute nightmare to get that pop correct. Oh man, I can't even balance on this. Now this is obviously to the extreme, but with the board tilting away from me and not being flat at the start, it is very difficult to get that pop correct. I'm not saying go outside with a spirit level and check your favorite spots, but if you're on a slope, this becomes a whole lot harder very quickly. I hate rail tricks.